Hey OGs, this is Stacy Ann, and today we're going to be making a 3-layer basic star ornament. This ornament is completely no-sew, and if you've never made one of these before, I think you're going to be really surprised by how easy it is. Before we get started, I want to remind you that I've got printable supply lists for this ornament and most of the ornaments that we have on this channel. You can find a link to this right below, and it lays out the fabric cuts and quantities for both this version that I'm going to be making today, which is the 3-layer, and then also a 4-layer version. All right, so get this below, and let's just go over the main supplies here really quickly. The main thing that you need is fabric, and you'll need to cut it into 2 by 3 inch rectangles. For your layer 1 color, which is the center of your star, you'll need 8 rectangles. And then for layers 2 and 3, you'll need 16 rectangles of each one. And then the last piece of fabric that you'll need is the band, hopefully not as wrinkly as this one. This is the piece that's going to wrap around the center of your ornament, and it's about 2 to 2.5 inches wide by about 10.5 inches long. You're also going to need a foam ball. This one's about 3 inches. And to make this pattern really easy, we like to use lines. This is actually a pre-lined foam ball that I sell in my shop, which I'll link below. But you can also easily draw your own lines. We have a template that you can print out, which makes it really easy. And I will also link that below. And please don't be afraid of drawing your own lines. I promise it only takes a couple minutes, and those lines are what are going to help you get your ornament looking really straight and symmetrical like this one. You're also going to need lots of straight pins, a couple hundred of them, scissors, a flexible tape measure, and last but not least, you'll need whatever you want to decorate your ornament with. So if you want to make a bow on top, then you'll need some ribbons. Maybe you want to add some beads or sequins. You can do whatever you want. The sky's the limit. And I'll be sure to put a link below to some of our bow and embellishment videos. I believe that's everything. Let's start. We're going to start with a rectangle of your fabric number 1. Hold it lengthwise with the good side facing down, and then we're just going to take the top edge and fold it over a small amount, like maybe 1/2 inch or so. Then fold it in half the other way. This is just to find the center. Give it a crease, and then we'll unfold that. Where the crease is the center, and we're going to put a pin right through that crease and just a hair below that top folded edge. Now pin this into one of the pole markings on the ball. And by the way, the pole markings are where all those lines are converging on either half of the ball. So pin this into the center and also centered over one of the lines. Push it flat down and then take the left half and fold it straight down. That's the left half of a triangle. And now you can fold the right side down the same way, finishing the triangle. Let the right half overlap the left half just a tiny bit, just enough so that you can stick one pin through both halves to hold them in place. You also want to make sure that the center line that you've created down the center of the triangle is also aligned with that line on the foam ball. And then pin this in the bottom center, holding both sides in place. Now smooth each of the 2 outer corners, left and right sides, and pin those down as well. And there's your first triangle. We're going to flip this around and do the exact same thing, but directly opposite. Prep another rectangle in the same color in the same way. Now pin this into that same pole marking, but directly opposite the first one. You want your pin to sit pretty much almost up against the tip of the first triangle, but not pierce it. And then push that flat down. You'll notice that the top edge of this fabric starts to overlap the tip of that fabric just a tiny bit. That's okay. Then you're going to fold down the left side and the right side just like we did before, making sure that this center line down the middle of your triangle is aligned with the line below. Pin through the bottom center and then the 2 sides. Now we're just going to fill in the other 2 spaces with 2 more triangles in the same fabric. Every piece of fabric in this ornament is prepped the same way except for the final band. If you find after you add these pieces that you have gaps of foam showing between the triangles, I've got another video that can help you solve that problem. I'll put a link to that in the description. Okay, we're going to start on layer 2 and we're going to switch to fabric 2. This layer is going to use 8 rectangles, but they're all going to be prepped the same way. So for this layer, we're not going to be starting in the dead center where we started layer 1. We're going to be measuring out from the center just a little bit. That way we can leave some of the layer 1 fabric showing in the middle of the ornament. So you're going to want to measure from the center where all those points converge and then down the center line of one of those triangles from layer 1 by about 5/8 of an inch. Pin your prepped fabric right there at that point, and then right in the center of one of those triangles below. One other thing, you can play with that 5/8 inch measurement. If you want a smaller star in the center, try maybe measuring like 1/2 of an inch from the center point. So the bigger your measurement, then the more of the layer below is going to show on the finished ornament. So you can play with that, but whatever measurement you pick here, you want to do the same measurement for the rest of this layer, all 8 pieces. So then fold the left and right sides down just like before, and then making sure that that line that you've created down the center lines up with the line on the foam below, and then pin at the bottom center and in the left and right sides. I'm going to flip this over and do the exact same thing on the other side. I want to measure down the same amount on this side as I did over here. I measured down from the center by 5/8 of an inch. So here I need to measure down from the center by the same amount. And now I'm going to do 2 more directly opposite those first 2. Okay, so we're halfway to our star shape. We're going to do 4 more of those same triangles to fill in these 4 holes. These will also sit 5/8 of an inch from that center point. All right, we've got 1 more layer. This time we'll just measure out a little further from the center. And actually, I'm going to use the tips of layer 2's triangles to measure from. So first, let me prep my first piece. Now take a look at your layer 2 pieces again really quick. You can clearly see which ones were the first 4 pieces of that layer and which ones were the last 4, because the first 4 are almost all the way covered up by the last 4. So when I'm starting my layer 3 pieces, I like to make sure I do it in the same order. I want to make sure that I put the first 4 pieces of layer 3 on top of those mostly covered up pieces from layer 2. So first let me start with one of those then, and I'm going to measure from the tip of one of those right down the center. And I think I'm going to start here about 5/8 inch. I'm going to see what that looks like. I might end up coming down a little further. But what I want to make sure of here is when I create this triangle, I just want to make sure that it comes all the way to the equator of the ball, which is the midway point between the 2 halves. We want to make sure that this layer is going to completely cover the rest of the foam to the halfway point. And it looks like, for me, that's not going to be a problem. So actually, you know what? I'm going to come down just a little bit more than that. And the reason being is because I want more of this white fabric to show, because it's really pretty. It might be hard to see in the video, but it's got like an iridescent pattern on it. It's really pretty. Okay, I like that. And now I'm really safe with the equator. I'll go ahead and pin down the bottom center and the left and right sides. I forgot to measure where I brought that point down to, so when I go to do this next piece directly opposite, I'm going to eyeball it the best I can and then see where my measurement is before I create the triangle. I'm guessing this will be about 3/4 of an inch. Yep, it's about 3/4, so that's the measurement then that we will use for the rest of this layer. All right, now I'm going to do the same thing to fill in these remaining 4 spots. And here you can see me 100% cheating on how I'm prepping the fabric. I'm just basically prepping it as I'm putting it on. And you may find yourself doing the same after you get used to making these. So now we're just going to flip this over and do the exact same thing on the opposite side. It's easy to know where to start because we're using a line ball where the center is clearly marked, and that is so much easier than eyeballing. Now remember how a second ago we were talking about how the first 4 pieces in these layers are partially covered up by the outer 4 pieces? Well, I want to make sure that the pieces I now am going to put on side 2 line up the same way. It is kind of like a perfectionist thing, but it does look good on the finished ornament. I think it's noticeable. So in order to make sure that I do that, I want to start with my first 2 triangles so that they line up with these partially covered up triangles, which I call, by the way, inner triangles and outer triangles. Super creative, right? So the ones that are partially covered up are the inner triangles. I want to line one of my first 2 triangles on this half with one of those inner triangles. So it's really easy to do. It sounds more complicated than it is. I'm just going to follow a line of inner triangles, their center line right around 2 side 2, and then that means that my first triangle needs to also align with that same line. So I'm cheating on my prep again here, but I'm going to pin this into the center just like I did on side 1. I've just put that right into the center pole, and I'm aligning the middle of it with that line that I just followed around. You could even, if your fabric is dark like mine, you could even use like a pen or something to just mark that and make it easier. So now the top edge is actually aligning with the perpendicular line to that one, but when I create my triangle, you'll see that my center line that I've created is aligned with that line, and then that is aligning with the inner triangles from side 1. Once you've done this on the first triangle, you don't even need to worry about it anymore, because this triangle, being one of the first 2, is going to be partially covered up on its edges by the remaining 2 triangles. And there is triangle 1. We'll flip it over and do the same exact thing directly opposite, and the rest of this layer is going to go the same way. See how the edges of this are just slightly overlapping the edges of those first 2 triangles? The overlap is more subtle here in layer 1, but you saw how that did increase in layers 2 and 3. Layer 1 done. And remember, for layer 2, we came out by 5/8 of an inch from the center point. And by the way, make sure that you start the first triangle in this layer over one of the first triangles from the previous layer. And now I'll just continue adding these triangles exactly the same way that we did on side 1. Okay, last layer. So again, start over one of your inner triangles. And on side 1, we measured 3/4 of an inch from the tips of our layer 2 triangle. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. When you create your triangles in this final layer, be sure that that center line that you create aligns with the center of the triangles from the other side of the ornament. That just makes it look nice. Another thing that you want to keep in mind here is your pins need to stay at the center of the ball. You don't want to be pinning into your finished side 1 too far. And so even if the bottoms of these triangles really overlap over here, that's okay. Just make sure your pins don't. We can always trim up this excess fabric after we're done pinning, as long as those pins have stayed right there around the center of the ball. It's right where the equator was, although you can't really see that anymore. But a good rule of thumb is that your pins don't come past the bottom pins from side 1. Now fill in the final remaining gaps. Okay, that's side 2. I'm honestly not thrilled with it. I feel like my center star came out a little too big compared to side 1, but oh well, I have no idea how I did that. When I hang it, I'll make sure that side's on the back. So now we're going to take and trim everything that's below these pins. If you kept your pin line straight, then you'll have a nice, pretty even line of excess here to trim off. As you're doing this, just make sure you don't accidentally cut into the fabric from side 1. And now we have a nice even line of pins and raw edges that we can use our band to cover up. So now we'll use your last longer piece of fabric. You're going to start with the good side face down, holding it lengthwise and starting at one end. We're going to fold in one side about 1/3 of the way, and you don't have to fold the whole thing at once. You won't be able to. We'll just start at the end, fold in one side like 1/3 of the way or so, and then fold in the other side about the same amount. What you've ended up with is a band of fabric that has no raw edges on one side and one raw edge running down the other side. The raw edge side we want to face down. The good side is faced up, and decide where you want the top of your ornament to be, so where you're going to hang it from and where the bow is going to be and all that. And then you're going to place this starting at that point face down so that the raw edge is hidden. And if you will need this to be wider, because let's say you have more messy stuff to cover up, you can make this wider by just folding in the sides a little bit less. Or you can make it thinner, which I need to do by folding in the sides a little bit more. So I'm gonna start right there, put this face down, and then just use a couple of pins up here to hold this in place. And then we'll just continue to fold, wrapping the ornament around those raw edges and covering them as we go. Pull it pretty taut. You don't want to pull it so tight that if you have a pattern in your fabric that it gets distorted, but tight enough so that it lays really smooth. And then when you get back to your starting point, go ahead and give it another couple of pins. If you have any excess, you can go ahead and trim it off. So now we have no more raw edges or pins showing except at the very tippy top. And this is where you can put a bow and a hanger if you would like to, or maybe you want to cover the top some other way. And this is also the point where you can decorate however you want. You can pin on some beads or sequins. You can hang a charm from under the bow, or you could put one in the center. Okay, so here's my ornament finished. I pinned on some beads and I added a bow on top along with a hanger. We have a whole series of videos on how to do different types of bows, so I'll put a link to that below. And then just a quick reminder that you can grab this printable supply list below as well. Guys, if you have any questions, please be sure to put them in the comments below. I'll help you out the best that I can. And if you make this, please also let me know. I love hearing that. Thanks so much for watching.